So I'm a Utah native. I grew up in the East Mill Creek area near Skyline High School. And I went to school at some of the community colleges, ended up at Brigham Young University, and studied business management there. And at the time, they had an emphasis in entrepreneurship. And that was my way of staying sane through college. I was always trying to start something. And it was therapeutic to be talking about starting things at school, at least. But it was also kind of torture for me. I really wanted to be out working more than being at school, but it was still a great experience to be at school. And I lean on those skills all the time. When I left BYU, I went and worked for a couple of kind of internet-focused companies. I worked for Overstock.com, a pretty prominent retailer, and then went and worked for a local company called ClearLink. And they had a little sister company that was called Local Results that was into local SEO. You guys know the world of SEO, local SEO. So I had an interest in business and marketing, especially B2B and especially online through those years. Ended up starting my own digital marketing agency about 12 years ago. And that company still runs today. So marketing is a bit of a background for me. And about 7 years ago, a good friend and I ended up starting Blip.
What made you want to get into that particular element? So go from digital advertising to kind of twisting the traditional advertising. What's that story?
It does seem like a little bit of a strange leap, right? The world's all heading digital advertising. I was steeped in search engine optimization, paid ad management online. I was down in Las Vegas representing my marketing agency at a conference put on by Yesco, a native Utah brand. I guess maybe not native to Utah. They may have started in Idaho or Wyoming, but Utah company. On my way back from their conference in Las Vegas, I met up with some buddies of mine, a bunch of entrepreneurial types in St. George. And they were all hanging out at a swig, dirty soda, shop, right? And I showed up, I think, with a Yesco lanyard still on my chest. And so those guys were like, where you been? What's Yesco? And I said, well, they do lots of things. Like when you think about Las Vegas and the neon cowboy and all those big, crazy sports stadium signs and all that stuff, that's Yesco. But you also drove by like probably hundreds of their billboards on the way from northern Utah to southern Utah. And that's what they do. And this group is really prone to just like tearing everything apart, dissecting the world and trying to see opportunities or ask critical questions because that's how businesses are born and good ideas are born. And my good buddy, Brent, he was like, okay, so you're in the world of digital advertising. I've noticed some of those billboards are like, they're digitized, right? I assume they're just huge computer screens on a stick. So I assume I can go log into some platform and self-serve and, advertise like I could on Google or Facebook. And I just laughed, right? I was just like, no, that is not how it is. The digital billboards at that time were sold the same way that the industry had been selling vinyl billboards, which is the same way that they were selling painted billboards. And I love to joke these days, it's the same way cavemen sold paintings on their walls. Like the sales process hadn't evolved with the advertising medium as it became digital. And that conversation turned into a really fun conversation as we were projecting what should this industry look like? What would the future of the billboard industry be? And really, I would probably give most of the credit to my business partner, Brent Thompson. He was stumped and kind of stubborn on this point. He was like, I think to him what was intuitive and what he could see is that every form of media, once it had converted from analog to digital, ended up evolving along a common kind of evolutionary path. The end point was that they would be sold at the smallest possible unit of purchase. We like to call that single unit economics. So you began with like well, for your generation, probably, well, I don't know about your generation, but for my generation, it was mostly CDs. That was the thing as I was growing up, right? If you wanted music, you bought a CD, and which meant you bought 12 tracks or something for $15 or whatever it was. And then as time went on, you could buy MP3s, right? And now you just go stream something, right? And the way you're paying for it is someone's advertising to you, right? But the smallest possible unit of purchase there is just listening to the song. It's not even buying the song, right? And then think about everything else, right? It all boils down to pay-per-click, pay-per-view, pay-per-stream. And what we realized in that conversation was that billboards would be sold pay-per-blip, as we call it, right? That was inevitable. It was irrefutable. And so we were kind of stumped. It's like, that should have happened 10 years ago. What's going on here? And so I thought there must be a good reason, some red tape, some whatever it is. Like, that should have happened. It's not happened. There's got to be a good reason. And so we just sat on the idea for months. My business partner, Brent, we'd get together regularly, and every month or so he'd be like, that billboard idea, like, I just can't get that out of my head. I'd be like, well, what have you found? Are you seeing anything? And after about 6 months, we're sitting down at a local Mexican restaurant, El Mexiquense, personal favorite of mine. And we're just like, we do not find anyone doing this. It is the future. Like, that's going to happen. There's no question about whether or not computers are going to be optimizing billboard space on a per ad play basis, a per blip basis. So we can't find good evidence for why it's not being done. Is there someone who's better positioned than us to do it? And for a variety of reasons, we decided, no, we're probably best positioned to pull this off. And so I called up Pat O'Donnell, the president of Yesco Outdoor Media, whom I had worked with through my advertising agency, and had worked with a lot of the great folks at Yesco. And we just went into his office and said, look, you're the godfather of billboards as far as we're concerned. You've been in it your whole life. You were painting billboards, right? You know this industry through and through. You're sitting on the governing bodies of the industry, the OAAA and Geopath, et cetera. Here's what we see. We see an inevitable future. That's our job as innovators, entrepreneurs. It's to kind of see into the future. And this is how billboards are going to be sold. Like, we don't have any question about that. And that seems like really good news for everyone. Because small and medium-sized businesses whom I had been working with throughout my career were limited to primarily activation or transactional advertising. And there were new and incredibly powerful forms of activation advertising. Facebook, paid advertising on Facebook, incredibly powerful, some of the best advertising opportunities I had seen during my career. Google Ads, pay-per-click, fantastic. Like, there's all these great things online. But for those who are more sophisticated in their understanding of marketing, who look at advertising as a funnel, from activation through conversion and ultimately through advocacy for our brand, you recognize that each marketing medium or every form of marketing media has different strengths and weaknesses. And if the only tool you have is activation advertising, you're just going to be paying an excessive cost for that exposure. Whereas if you have access to broad brand awareness, or an ability to fill the top of your advertising funnel more inexpensively, then you can optimize a campaign. You get the right tool for the right job. Good old wisdom. And so we're sitting down there with Pat, and we're like, this seems like really good news for small and medium-sized businesses if they can get on billboards. They've never had access to broadcast media. And more people on the same inventory, that's just going to result in more money for the media owners. So this seems like a win-win. Tell us, why can't this be done? And we fully expected him to be like, oh, come on, you guys, here's why. And to, rattle off the reasons it wasn't being done. Instead, after about 5 minutes sitting there with Pat, he's like, that's the future. What's next? And we were kind of shocked that was the reality. So we went home and started coding. And, I can tell you more about the story, but that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah. So you started going to the back end of the site, getting kind of how it would look like an ad platform, make it easy user-based, things like that.
Yeah, there were a number of things that had to be invented or created for this to be possible. The digital billboards themselves, they all have computers on them, and there's software on those computers that displays ads to the screen, right? And in order for us to create the first ever kind of real-time marketplace that could make decisions at the last possible moment about what the best opportunity is to place an ad on that board, we would need to be able to talk with those systems. So we ended up building software that could replace the software on those computers, that could talk with our cloud services and also understand what the billboard owner was trying to do through their contract sales on the sign and interleave all of that in real time and make decisions about what shows up there. And then, of course, we had to build an online two-sided marketplace platform where anyone could come create a free account and build a campaign and launch it. And then, of course, we had to create a website to promote it and all of the marketing behind all of that, right? That was kind of in the early days a sprint to create all of that infrastructure so that we could test our hypothesis.
That's awesome. So we interviewed a few people on the street to get their perspectives on what they think about billboards, billboard advertising in general, hearing just people who are driving around, just kind of randoms to get kind of their perspective. And some people didn't think they worked at all. Mm-hmm. And they were all fascinated when I would tell them, they're like, I'd ask them, how much do you think a billboard is? They're saying, like $300, $600. I was like, the digital ones, but the physical ones, $1,500, $3,000 a month, and they're like floored. So do you feel like there's certain audiences that are more susceptible to billboards or more open to it than others? And if so, why do you think that is?
There are people that seem to be more open to using them as an advertising media or medium. And everyone is susceptible to them as, consumers of that media. You can't ad block them. Like they are there, right? And we all see them and experience them, and they impress, messages upon us. The more sophisticated a marketer is, the more likely they are to engage in broadcast media. There's a correlation, though. More sophisticated marketers are often those with larger budgets representing larger brands. And so they've had the education and they have the opportunity historically to get engaged in TV and radio and billboards, these more historically expensive and inaccessible media. But obviously we came to change that. We came to educate the masses on the power of broadcast advertising and how to build a proper marketing mix so that you optimize your marketing funnel and you produce better results. 1 + 1 = 3 instead of 2 if you properly combine your marketing mix. There are some people that inherently are more like prone to select billboards because of how things have been done historically, but more and more people are understanding that now they're accessible to anyone. But we have a lot of educating to do. When people show up to Blip, their first mindset is, okay, so how many clicks am I going to get? It's like, well, you can't click on a billboard. Well, so how many phone calls should I get, on day one? Like, you're trying to impress people with your brand message so that when you show them an advertisement on Google or Facebook, or when your people call them, they know your brand, they've had certain touch points with you, and they're ready to activate, right? So there's a lot of education that goes into helping people transition from an activation or transactional advertising only mindset to this balanced marketing mix mindset, and then to expect each marketing medium to do its job. And in the case of billboards, primarily their job is broad local brand awareness and building a brand's authority so that the other parts of the marketing funnel can do their job more effectively.
What's the next logical step? So someone sees a billboard and that's that localized advertisement. Where would you recommend would be the next element in the funnel, for most successful businesses? Because you work with a lot. So.
It does depend on the business and what the offering is. But generally, when people see billboards, if they're going to take an action of their own as opposed to responding to some other touch point, they're going to look you up. They're going to go search for your brand. So I think a logical next step is to make sure that you have a strong online presence. They ought to have a website that does a good job of presenting their value proposition and educating people about the opportunity, right? They ought to have, ideally, a strong search presence so that if someone's going to in a search engine to look for them, they show up prominently and the information's accurate and things like that, right? It might be good to be engaging in some paid advertising. Social media is also a great place to have a solid presence because a lot of people go use that as a search engine and search for your brand, or go check to see, what your brand's activity or reputation is online. Another really important thing is to make sure that your brand has a strong online reputation, right? If someone shows up and you're all 1 stars and there's 5 of them, that's a problem. You might be wasting your money on broadcast advertising, right? There's a lot of other things you could do. It depends on, what you're doing. But as a general rule, people are going to go perform some level of research about you if you've intrigued them with billboard advertising or some other form of broadcast.
Have you seen an increase or decrease in the likelihood of businesses investing in billboards lately?
Oh, do you mean like in terms of like where we are economically? There is a slowdown. So 2 things that are interesting. We're sitting here, we're mid-January, right? One dirty little secret coming from an insider. Most advertisers have this like arbitrary mindset around the end of a year. We all tend to think like the year has ended, we're starting over. Really, the next day shows up and we're not starting over. You're exactly where you left off, right? And as an artifact of that, a lot of businesses do all this planning running up to the holiday season. And then they just they wake up January 1st, like, okay, what should we do now? And they schedule their campaigns to shut off. And so the dirty little secret for an insider is that billboards become more available and more affordable at the beginning of the year. So that is both an opportunity and a reality. Within the billboard industry, there's a seasonal slump in January, February, and then from March onward throughout the year, it starts accelerating. But also economically, there's kind of a spectrum of brands. You've got the really big, mature brands who know more about how to optimize their funnel, and you have the less mature kind of transactional only mindset brands. The big mature brands, they tend to keep spending through seasonal cycles better, but also in under economic pressure or in recessionary or fearful environments, they keep spending at the top of their funnel. They actually will shift resources from the transactional advertising. Okay, that person's not going to buy today, but I still want to be the first person top of mind when they're going to buy tomorrow. So they'll focus on the top of the funnel. But less mature, less educated marketers and advertisers, they'll pull back on the top of their funnel, which is a mistake, right? So within Blip, we have people that kind of are all over that spectrum. We see the smaller advertisers who are less sophisticated. As soon as they get nervous about the economy, they start pulling back more. And we step in with some education. Be like, okay, if you do need to pull back because of budget realities or whatever, like every business needs to manage their house well, manage their cash. But we step in and we're like, be thoughtful about what you're doing here. What you don't want to do is like hold on to your transactional advertising where your cost per click or your cost per 1,000 impressions or your cost per activation is going to just go up right now, and then let go of the long-term brand building that you're doing. You should probably be doing the opposite, or at least you should be like doing everything across the board equally. Like, okay, if I'm paring back 10%, let's do it everywhere. So that's a broader education than just a simple answer to your question, but we are seeing some of the smaller advertisers scale back as they get nervous about the economy. We see less of that in larger advertisers. The more sophisticated they are, the more they're like, I see prices going down. Let me shift some media spend here because that's less effective. And this is going to continue to be just as effective in terms of filling the top of my funnel, building brand awareness and brand authority. The brand awareness, brand authority play is more of a long-term focus. and the activation, transactional advertising, is more of a short-term focus. So you have to ask yourself the question, in today's environment, should my dollars be focused on the short-term thing or the long-term thing? And those who can afford it, who have the right education and understanding, in a recessionary or a down environment, they'll shift resources toward long-term.
So I guess for you, as you work with these companies, how can you help them see when it's effective to use a billboard or a billboard in general? When they start seeing the effectiveness of the form of advertising?
That is such a good question. So we'll talk about what makes for a campaign being effective and successful, and then we'll talk about measurement. What makes a campaign successful kind of hinges on some really well-known marketing best practice. So anyone who's been educated around marketing or advertising will be familiar with something called the rule of 7. And that is that in general, statistically, someone needs to be exposed to your brand at least 7 times before they'll be willing to take action, before they'll be willing to activate or convert, right? And so billboard advertising, as well as other kind of broadcast or brand awareness advertising, is really, really effective at some of these touch points, right? Getting people familiar with your brand in a medium that builds more brand authority than, a hanger on your door, right? It's larger than life, big brand, highway advertising, right? It carries a lot of brand authority with it. And what you're doing is you're building impressions. And what you want is you want to get to that number 7 on average for people, so that when they run into your social media feed or your Google ad or your Facebook ad, or when your sales rep calls them, or when they're near your store, whatever that activation moment is, you've built sufficient brand awareness and brand authority, and they're willing to take action, right? So in the case of billboards, what you want is not just impressions, but you want repeat impressions. So when we internally are looking to optimize a campaign, we're looking to achieve what we have coined and what we call qualified impressions, meaning the potential customer is qualified to take action, either on that next impression on billboards or on anything else further down your funnel, which is going to be optimized for conversion or activation. So once someone has seen your brand enough, they are now qualified. So you want some staying power in your brand awareness advertising. If all you do is put up a campaign for a little short stint and everyone sees it once, well, that's useful. You got one impression, and that might have been the 7th for someone that you've been hitting on social media or whatever. But what you want to do is use an awareness medium that has a good cost per 1,000 impressions to get those impressions out of the way. You want to hit them a number of times, right? And we've all seen brands that do a great job of they have that staying power and they own a place in our mind. Locally, I can think of a number of brands that if I just said their name, be like, what do they stand for? You just rattle it off because you've seen them on billboards for the last few years, right? So in general, you're going to see when you think about qualified impressions or people who are going to be ready to take action, when you start a billboard campaign, for the first little while, everyone's going to be first impressions, and then second and third. And what happens is, as you continue the campaign, the number of impressions that are qualified to take action actually accelerate on a curve like this until it plateaus. So it's kind of an S-shaped curve that represents how many people are qualified to take action. So what you want to do is you want to, as efficiently as possible, build as many qualified impressions as you can. And generally, as we optimize campaigns, what we see is it's around the 6-month mark in general. Depends on your budget and how many signs you select or whatever, but you start seeing acceleration in that curve, where more of the impressions you're paying for that day are qualified impressions, which are kind of the golden ticket, right? And then once you've reached the top of that S curve, what it means is every impression is a powerful impression, because they're all qualified impressions, or most of them are qualified impressions. And that's where you want to get, right? So long-term is ideal. And yet, what I always like to say is We had an advertiser once, like they accidentally started their campaign earlier than they meant to, and their ad showed up one time on one billboard for 8 seconds, and they got a phone call, and we're talking with them. They're like, "My ad only showed up once, and someone called me," and that is a phenomenal experience, but not the normal, right? Like you can't expect the leads to just pour in and the phone calls to happen on day one, because in general, you might be looking at a first impression, not a qualified impression. Does that answer your question in terms of like?
Yeah. So like about a 6-month curve, and then you really start to see do you feel like, do they taper off in effectiveness after a certain period of time? Is it one particular campaign, or like your brand's posting multiple billboards themselves throughout a different like images, or like
Yep.
What does that look like?
So once your campaign has matured, all that means is that the people who are seeing you have likely seen you before, and that's where you want to be. So it's not a point at which the advertising less effective. When you get to the top of the S curve, you're at a point at which the advertising is always maximally effective. The ramp up period is where you're going to see less impact from the advertising, because you don't have as many qualified impressions or as many people who have been exposed to your brand enough to take action, right? So I think that was the first part of your question. I'm forgetting the second part.
Second part was, would it be different images?
Oh, yeah.
Or is it going to be like, so for example, we have this Sweeto Burrito ad, we put it up there. Should we switch it every few months? Do we leave it just stay put, rock and roll for 6 months? Like what's the...
Yeah, so there's there's the concept of fatigue when it comes to advertising. If you've seen something before, you eventually will tune it out. So you absolutely want to refresh your creative. Sophisticated marketers, they do the same thing with online advertising. You don't want the same thing showing up in your Google feed or your Facebook feed or your social media feed. Eventually it just becomes noise and people just tune it out, right? You want to continuously be engaging your audience, catching their attention with new messaging that reinforces what you're trying to portray. The frequency with which you should change that out, it really depends on the frequency of your ads showing up on a billboard, right? The more your ads are hitting that audience, then the more frequently you're needing to change the creative. If you're a lower budget advertiser and you're just not showing up that much, you're kind of taking the really long game within a limited budget, then you won't need to change your creative as often, because the people who will be seeing it for the first or second time for quite a while, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. What are the elements in a billboard advertisement you feel bring the most results?
So simplicity is the most important concept. When you're driving down the highway or even a surface street at speed, you really only have a few seconds to consume what's on that message or on that ad, right? So we try to encourage people to have one very strong and prominent visual component to their ad, and to use 5 words or less to portray their message. For people who have been doing print advertising or whatever, this is just a really difficult process, because they want to say so many things. I'm a very verbose person. I like to say so many things. So simplicity is really, really key. And even if you're not going to advertise on billboards, I'd challenge any brand that is trying to say anything to go try to design a good billboard ad. And the reason is, when you force yourself to go say what you want to say within 5 words, you really have to get down to the essence of things. Really good marketers will go through that process anyway to go find what is the essence? What is the main thing we need to say? And billboards force you to do that well. So simplicity is really important. A lot of people are prone to think, well, I need my full website URL, or I need my telephone number, or I need my street address, or whatever it is. And it's okay to use those things. Telephone numbers are really hard to memorize when you're cruising down the highway. We don't recommend them. URLs, if they're simple, are great. And oftentimes your name is your URL. Then you've got 2 birds with one stone. It's fantastic. But in general, what you want is you want your brand name to be clear, or your brand to be clear. Then someone can go look you up on the internet. So a very prominent, striking visual element, 5 words or less, and they need to know who you are in the simplest terms. And the shorter you can say that, the better.
Do you notice a difference with the brands that they do something funny or a little edgy? They're the ones that get more traffic, get more results, get you case studies. Like, how does that look for you?
Yeah, two parts to that. The first part is, yes, like memorable is really what it comes down to. So like getting someone's attention and being memorable, those are important principles across all advertising and marketing, right? So that's really important. The other thing related to kind of like entertaining or memorable or funny is that it gets people talking about it, right? And that can be really powerful. We see a really strong connection between social media advertising and billboard advertising. A lot of times there's a synergy where billboard ads are creating an online conversation and a social media conversation, right? And so, yeah, I mean, you want to get their attention. You want it to be entertaining, potentially. You want it to be memorable, certainly. And if you do a good job of that, it actually amplifies your campaign, either in, word of mouth kind of person-to-person communication throughout a community, or, virtually through social media or some other community.
Like that. Now, for kind of a fun question, what kind of advertising works on you as a person?
What works on me? I would say billboards have a greater impact on me than anybody in the world because I pay so much attention to them, right? It does come down to where you are and what you pay attention to. I use an ad blocker, right? And yet, like, I own a marketing agency that does online advertising, right? But personally, I use an ad blocker. So I don't see a lot of the online advertising. So it's not going to be incredibly effective for me. Another thing I do is like I lock down my privacy and I don't let search engines remember my stuff. And like I keep my online experience really, really clean. So like those advertisements aren't as effective on me. And I don't listen to the radio. I don't, right? Like my generation generally doesn't. I don't watch TV. I use Netflix and Disney Plus and things like that. So, and I'm a lot like more and more people, right? So the advertising that works on me, I would say, things that are in, I watch movies. So movie advertising works on me. Things that are in my space. So out of home advertising, billboard advertising works on me. Trying to think of what else. Those are the things that come to mind because I kind of block out the rest.
Like mail, anything like that?
Mail doesn't work on me because I just refuse to pay any attention to any of it. Like I'm so angry at mail for like cluttering my life that my patience is zero. Like I don't respond to any of it. So this is a really important distinction. You asked me what works on me, and I'm just one person, right? If you ask me as a marketer, which marketing media do I use? All of them. Because like there is a strength or a weakness to each medium, right? You need to use the right tool for the job. And guess what? Like mailers are incredibly effective for some businesses and some use cases. I've used them, right? And they can be great. Radio can be fantastic. TV can be fantastic, right? So my message is not like billboards are the end all be all. It's not the case. Like there are people who come to me and they'll say, okay, like, yeah, you're one of the founders of Blip. Like I should use you, right? And there are times where I'm like, yeah, you should down the road a little bit. Like build your website. You probably shouldn't use billboards yet. And then after you build your website, do these couple of things, right? There are people that come to me for advice and I'll be like, oh, you belong on TikTok. You belong on YouTube. You belong on Facebook, right? You should send out a mailer. You should all of those media are valuable and have different strengths. The mistake people make is to think that the thing that works for them is the only thing they should consider, right? That's dangerous as a marketer because you're going to be inefficient.
For people how far along should a business be before they consider billboard advertising?
They should be findable online. I think it would be a mistake for most businesses to run a billboard advertising campaign if they don't have a website that represents them well. And if that website is their Facebook page or whatever it is, that's fine. But if someone goes and types in your brand on the internet, they should be able to find you, or else you could be wasting some energy. There are exceptions to that. One of the less common use cases, but incredibly valuable, is what we call directional advertising for billboards. If your store is on the corner by that billboard or at the exit right after that billboard, you can just say exit now for 50 cents off your Coke. And it doesn't matter what your website presence looks like, right? But for most businesses in general, you want to have a website, and you want to be represented well online generally. And I talked through, reputation matters. For some businesses, their social media presence or other things matter. Generally, those are prerequisites in my mind.
In comparison to a static billboard, why should someone go with a blip board, or what are the positives and negatives of both?
Yeah, they're both incredibly valuable, and it's the right tool for the job, right? Within billboard advertising, there are two important concepts. One is frequency. That's how often your ad plays. And the other is reach. That's how many people, or how broad of a geography or an audience can you reach. Vinyl billboards or static billboards are really good at getting high frequency in a specific area. And in general, you're going to get a better CPM, or cost per thousand impressions out of a vinyl billboard, if that use case fits you really well. And for some people, I'll encourage them, you should go to one of our partners and buy vinyl billboards. That's a good match for you, right? Oftentimes, businesses can't afford, as you mentioned earlier, the price of just one billboard. I'm the only thing on that pole on the side of the road, right? That's a use case in which, even if a vinyl billboard might have been ideal, your budget doesn't allow for it. We allow for you to show up at a, less frequency within that location. So that's one use case that's valuable. Another use case is if you need to expand your reach within that budget. In general, you want to do what's going to optimize a campaign for the most qualified impressions in your target area. And in some cases, that means I should be spreading this across a larger number of signs. Another use case is I want to get very targeted because I know something about my customer that's important. Let's say that you're a restaurant and you know that people are really going to activate around meal times, right? With Blip, you can optimize your campaign to only show up around meal times, for example. So there are cases in which that level of control is really important for optimizing a campaign. And there are cases where it's less important. So it's a function of what is your budget, how broad of a reach do you need for your campaign, and how much control do you need over your campaign? Do you need to turn it on and off? Do you need to test certain things? Do you need to target times of day or days of week? Do you need to target weather conditions, right? There's a bunch of things that that go into a decision about, what form of billboard advertising is going to make the most sense for you. We have over 300 billboard operator partners all over the country who have salespeople working carefully with local, generally larger businesses on crafting really effective campaigns where they're buying 1/8 of a billboard and they show up every 8th rotation and they're buying several vinyl billboards, and that is the best thing for them. And we like to kind of guide people to whatever is going to create the best outcomes for them. For the vast majority of businesses, it's Blip. That's kind of a bold statement, and here's the reason. The vast majority of businesses are small and medium-sized businesses, and their budgetary constraints, if they want to optimize their marketing mix to have the right mix of activation and broadcast advertising, they're not going to have the budget for it. But as they grow up, it might be best to go buy vinyl billboards. It just depends on their needs. Now to be clear, we have businesses of all sizes using Blip because they're trying to pick the right tool for the right job. And, according to those factors, sometimes it's Blip and oftentimes it's Blip.
How much on Blip should we be spending to see a return if we're starting?
Yeah. How much should you be spending to see a return? So that is an impossible question because of all the factors that are involved. If you have the wrong message or a really crappy brand or offering, well, spend as much as you want. You probably won't see a return, right? There is no substitute for having a good business, offering a good product or service, and having a good advertisement, right? But assuming you have a good business and value to offer, and you have a good advertisement, it depends on what you're selling and who your audience is. We do have staff internally that like to kind of give ranges, but I just don't think it's safe to. If you're in a smaller community and there's like one billboard in town, you might be spending hundreds of dollars a month and like be top of mind for everyone, right? If you're in a huge, NFL city market, where there's just, millions of people driving by all the time, to have an impact, you're gonna have to spend a lot more. So I'm not comfortable giving like a specific range. Here's how we approach it. A business comes to us and says, here is where I want to attract people. This is where I want more brand awareness and brand authority. And we'll make a suggestion based on how many billboards are in their market and based on their business's reality and what makes sense within their marketing mix. So it really does depend on all of those factors. We have, there's a business, and if he or she happens to see this, this interview you're doing, they'll have to, hit me on LinkedIn or something. There's a business that I think started advertising like within the earliest days of Blip. They're called brakesonly.net. And they're like I think they're a mobile brakes, car brakes repair company. And I don't know what their budget is, but it's not high, but they have just been consistent over time for a long time. And I see them fairly regularly on the billboards over time, right? And so their brand is impressed in my mind, and they're not spending a lot of money probably, but they're doing it consistently over time. So in general, you can trade the size of budget for the duration to have a similar impact. You can raise your budget to have an impact over a shorter period of time. And you can lower your budget and just advertise over a longer period of time. Long-winded answer. I wish I had an easy answer for that question, but there isn't a fair answer, right? For some businesses, like to have an impact that they're going to feel, they're going to need to spend thousands of dollars a month. And for some, it's like low hundreds or something like that.
Do you have any case studies of particular businesses that you or your like sales reps or people that you work with that you highlight on this is how we've turned this business into help them grow so much? Do you have any of those particular
Yeah, we should do a lot more of it. But on our website, blipbillboards.com, we do feature a number of businesses that we've taken the time to be like, okay, tell us what happened here. Anecdotally, our customer success team are hearing stories every day. We're dealing with a large volume of advertisers, and they hear awesome stories every day. We need to be more proactive about like publishing those for people, but we do have a handful that we've put on the website.
How has the billboard industry changed since you started?
That is an interesting question. How has the billboard industry changed? It's changed a lot. For one, what we do, kind of the vision of making billboards accessible to all, has really become best practice. At this point, if you're a billboard operator and you are not using Blip, and you're not opening up your inventory to the masses, there's just no logical reason. We've case studied and proven that by attracting the advertisers that wouldn't otherwise be using billboards, everybody wins. Sign owners' inventory is used more fully. They make more money. These businesses are more effective in their advertising, and they grow better, and then they spend more money on billboards. It's a virtuous cycle, right? So opening up billboards to the masses through Blip's marketplace has become best practice, and that is a huge change. It didn't exist 7 years ago. Another thing that has changed is what the industry calls programmatic, a really terrible name for a good thing, which is the world of online advertising. There are a lot of online advertising platforms that people use to buy display ads and other online advertising, and some of those people who are buying display ads will buy through what the industry calls programmatic companies, and those are other sources of revenue and other advertisers that haven't historically used the media that we've partnered with, and they were able to deliver programmatic revenue to billboard owners as well. So self-serve marketplace advertisers, that's what Blip offers. People who are buying through other kind of media channels, funneling them through, that's become best practice as well. And that really was not the case 7 years ago when we started. What else has changed in the industry? The digitization of billboards continues to be a primary focus for billboard operators, and that's just accelerating. Blip has changed the economics of owning billboards for digital billboard owners. They're more profitable. And that's not at the expense of anyone. They're just more efficient, right? And so their payback period on billboards is improved, and so they have been accelerating, converting vinyl billboards to digital billboards. That's another significant change.
How are you expanding?
So we're a two-sided marketplace. When you think of Uber or Airbnb, these are two-sided marketplace. You have supply on the one side. In the case of Uber, it's people with cars. In the case of Airbnb, it's people with apartments or houses or whatever, right? And then you have riders in the case of Uber, or the tenants. I don't know what the word is for Airbnb, right? People staying in these places. And so as a two-sided marketplace, we have to promote Blip to advertisers, and we have to promote it to people who own these billboards. We partner with them. So we have sales and marketing efforts on both sides of that marketplace. And in the early days, we had to introduce the message of Blip to billboard owners pretty aggressively. These days, less so. The industry knows who we are and the value we add, and so we continuously have more inventory coming onto our platform.
Where's the next places we should expect to see more Blip boards? Are you guys looking at expanding more here in the state or in other places, or how's that looking?
Everywhere. Generally, I would say the markets that we had the most adoption in earlier were second, third tier markets. You'll expect to see Blip showing up more and more in the bigger cities and the bigger markets as time moves on. But really, we're expanding everywhere all the time. There's not a really pointed effort to one specific place. Generally, we can provide value to advertisers and to billboard owners everywhere. And we're happy to generally work with everyone everywhere. So as billboard owners become familiar with us, as more and more advertisers are asking for us in different geographies, we try to respond to that demand on both sides of the marketplace. In some cases, we have all of these people who have indicated they want to buy in a certain area, and we don't have inventory there. So we'll go to the billboard owners and say, there's a bunch of pent-up demand here. Let's get started. And in some cases, it comes from the other side of the marketplace. We respond to people coming to our website and saying, I'm interested in this geography. So when we see excess demand in an area, we'll go respond to it.
Just finish off, what's your favorite part about this industry? What gets you motivated and excited about being in billboards?
What gets me motivated and excited about being in billboards? Billboards are the public square. We all see them. That wasn't a choice that any one of us really got to make, except for the people putting up the signs and the local, regulators that made that decision. And I think it's important that the public square is accessible to everyone. This is one of the things that was really motivating about starting this company. You know, as something that everyone sees, we should all have kind of an equal voice in being able to show up there, right? And before Blip, as much as we love the big brands of the world and love to work with the big brands of the world, it's important that their voices aren't the only voices in our communities. So democratizing or making such a powerful advertising media accessible to everyone is extremely motivating. I guess the other thing that is exciting to me beyond, making sure that the public square is accessible to everyone is, it's similar in nature, making sure that all businesses and organizations have an equal opportunity to be efficient and effective with what they do. And there's still a lot of education to go around before digitally native marketers start to understand how to use traditional media, even though it's been digitized. So seeing businesses just be more effective because of what we've done is incredibly motivating as well.